during that speech, she kisses Booth, right? Because she's kissing Nick. I'm like, if I'm Nick and I'm going through this, I'm like, you kiss this orc-looking motherfucker? Are you for real right now?
Welcome to the What's Our Verdict podcast, where we fashion ourselves cinematic judge and jury. My name is JJ Crowder. I'm here with my co-host, Javier Ortiz.
What is up, my nerd?
And Ian Anderson.
Some shit.
As always, we appreciate your help growing the podcast. Go ahead and hit that follow or subscribe button. Tell a friend about us. Go check out our website, whatsourverdict.com, where you can listen to all of our episodes. You can also sign up for our newsletter to get exclusive content and updates about our upcoming episodes. Pick up some sweet, sweet merch and interact with us by leaving comments on our episodes and send us an email and all the fun things. Question we always ask: if you ever find yourself wanting to spend the time, money, or both on a movie? To help with that question, each week we put a movie on trial, discuss the facts, pass judgment, and let you know our verdict. Today we're reviewing Reminiscence. It was released August 20th, 2021. It was written and directed by Lisa Joy. Stars Hugh Jackman, Rebecca Ferguson, Tandiwe Newton, and Cliff Curtis. Nick Bannister, a private investigator of the mind, navigates the alluring world of the past. When his life is changed by the new client, May, a simple case becomes an obsession after she disappears, and he fights to learn the truth about her. If you haven't seen this movie and you want to avoid spoilers, now's the time to pause the podcast, go watch this movie, come back, pick up you left off. If you don't mind spoilers, hang out with us, because we're about to spoil the shit out of this thing. Guys, there's a lot of exposition and narration in this movie.
Too much.
I think that's the first thing that I noticed is I like the fact that Lisa Joy created this new world, right? You have this post-climate change world where the oceans have risen enough to cover Florida and Miami in water. And then you have this new technology of being able to look into memories and project memories on a screen and use them as like questioning techniques, interrogation, things like that. And you have this war that's hinted at over, I'm assuming, resources. They don't really explain that war too much, but you have all these backdrops, but it's so complex that it needs so much exposition that the first 20 minutes of this movie, you're listening to Hugh Jackman explain the world that you're in so that we can get on with the story.
And you don't even get that much information, right? Like, we don't know how far the waters have come up. We don't know what exactly the war was about. We don't know if there's continued issues, if the water is still rising. And it seems like after a certain point, no one gives a fuck in this movie, right?
Yeah.
It's like, here's the water. It's really high. Anyway, look at this chick. She's super hot.
And I think
my biggest disappointment was that I wanted to know so much more about the world, and I didn't care about the story that was actually going on, because it just felt so simple or familiar than this world did, which I was wanting to dive more into.
I agree. It does. The fact that the world and the circumstances they were in was more interesting than the actual storyline of this movie, and like the whole disappearance is part of what makes this movie suffer, at least in the first 3/4 of this movie, because I'm with you. And I wanted to know more about the border war. I wanted to know more about the water rising. I wanted to know, I thought it was bitching to see people have to use boats as they're going downtown Miami, and the fact that it's so hot, and there's like, obviously there's going to be some issues with like the air conditioner or whatever, that they're actually nocturnal now because the world is heated up so much that during the day it's too hot to do things and to actually. So I was so intrigued by that I missed the story. I think that they needed to, they should have left out most of the exposition and all these little hints at what had happened and just start this movie in this world and make us figure it out as we go and not give us so much.
I would have liked to see the movie base when Hugh Jackman was still in the military, using the machine to interrogate people. And I think you could have a cool mystery movie around that, right? There's some mystery he's trying to solve, so he's interrogating people, and the water's rising, and there's war and fighting. That would have, I think, been a more interesting movie than this.
I agree.
If you're going to make such an interesting world, the story should impact that world. Like, and the way this ends, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I kind of, got some unrest to finally boil over, but there's no real like connection. You could have told the same story without that world, without the flooding, without the, I'm bitter about that.
No, well, not to jump to the end, but let's jump to the end real quick. And at least that portion of the end that you just mentioned, Ian, and that is when it got to the end and he talked about the fact that this whole story got out and this rich family that created this whole problem because of very stupid ass reasons, though very common, and to see that the world still have those same old stories of greed and narcissism was really funny. But I didn't it took me a second to remember that they even talked about that there was an issue between what they called the barons, the rich people, and the common folk. So it was one of those things where I was really torn. To me, like, they tried to drop that payoff of there's this unrest and they're unseating the barons now. There's like this new revolution style. And I was like, yeah, but you didn't connect me to anyone other than Hugh Jackman and Tandy Newton enough for me to even care about that. So I was like, that's just a waste of story to me.
I watched it with my brother, and at the end he was like, I think I missed why people are rioting. And I think that's very indicative of their storytelling, right? So it's just like no one is invested in that whole social revolt story. Because that's not what the story is about. The story is about Hugh Jackman having a hard-on for Rebecca Ferguson, right? Yeah.
And having some crazy stalker skills.
Yeah.
Well, and I laughed because Casey was asking me, like, we watched it pretty late too, and she was like, why do I know her again? I was like, oh, she was the opera singer from The Greatest Showman. And I was like, and they had great chemistry in that movie. Mm-hmm. And so you know that these two were paired up in this movie because of the fantastic chemistry they have. And they do. Like, it's palpable, the chemistry those two have on screen. And I will say that the top, like the main four actors in this movie that I named. So you have Hugh Jackman, Rebecca Ferguson. Then you have Tandy Newton and Cliff Curtis, who plays the crooked cop. Mm-hmm. Those four are four fantastic actors. And they brought everything they had to this movie, but it was so convoluted, the story. I feel like that I was watching three different movies is what it really felt like. And so I was getting whiplash as we were jumping around. And it's funny that we watched Shang-Chi because I talked about in that review how that movie used flashback and turning back the clock in the most perfect way. And it wasn't about a movie about that, but it led us to the stories that we loved and these character progression, like you talked about, Javier. But this movie, which is really about going back, like that's what this whole movie's about, is using the past and memories to impact the future, really missed the boat with their flashback stuff in most cases. And it wasn't as interesting, and it didn't drive the story the way it should, especially considering that that's what this whole story is about, more or less. So I felt like they really failed in that way.
I'd be really curious to have like a memory specialist, I don't know, like a therapist, because it's like, I don't know if common knowledge is the right term, but like you don't recall the events of your day with perfect recall, right? Like your memory changes based on your perception of that memory. And I thought it would have been cool if they implemented or they included that in this story. And they did it. Like, it's like a perfect video of the events of certain days and stuff. So,
well, and I think they tried to, in a really roundabout, not great way, touch on it. Like the conversation between Hugh Jackman and Rebecca Ferguson at one point where he talks about, when she says, shouldn't you have just seen it through my eyes? And he kind of makes her go back and think of a memory, her first kiss, and how eventually she sees it like she's watching a movie, which I found very interesting. Like, I found that portion, like the science behind that and the thought process behind how we recall in our minds, like you were talking about, being very different than what we would think. Very interesting. But then I also feel like they set themselves up for failure in that way because they were bouncing back and forth in these memories, like from the watching a video version to the first person perspective in some of these.
Yeah, like
in a lot of ways. Yeah. And so I'm like, you can't have it both ways. Like, you're either the memory plays out as like a movie, or you're watching it in first person as we would think that we would recall our memories. And so that one twisted me up a little bit too. But I could bag on this movie all day because its flaws were so glaring. But I do want to talk about some of the things that I loved. And I will say this, I mentioned it in the spoiler free. When we get to I thought I was going to absolutely hate this movie. I was leaning towards that the longer it went. But once he figures out and he starts going after the cop, like once he starts piecing it together, and by proxy, myself as a movie watcher, and I figured out really quickly that the first client from all I can think about is her Clementine from Westworld that had the son through the big barren guy. Like I figured out real quick that Mr. Pasty, as Tandy Newton was calling him, was that old baron that you see that he couldn't interrogate because of health issues. And once I figured that out, once you learn he has a son, it all kind of fell into place. So it was very predictable that way once I learned all the pieces. But what I was interested in is once he starts figuring it out, Hugh Jackman's character, he starts looking for that cop. And once the cop comes in and their interactions and fights and things, that's when that whole movie got interesting with me, because you see him figuring out and the visceral nature of his just wanting to murk this cop comes out. And I felt for that, because the one thing that the relationship and the acting between Rebecca Ferguson and Hugh Jackman did was it really gave me buy-in to their relationship. So every time he was struggling, like I was emotional with him because he's just so good at acting. So that whole scene, all those scenes between Booth and Hugh Jackman's character were amazing to me. And it saved the movie in the end, because again, the other thing that they do is it's not a happy ending. Like it's pretty dark the way that this movie goes. So I did like the ending quite a bit when she's talking to him through the memory, knowing that his obsessive personality is not going to let him not look for her. And he's going to take it all the way to the end and figure it out. So she's having this conversation with this cop, but it's actually so that when Jackman gets a hold of this guy, he can see the memory and she's talking to him. I thought that was very clever. That whole 15-20 minute section of movie I really enjoyed.
I kind of felt a little differently about the ending, because I felt that it was building up and it was building up and it was building up. And I was waiting for this payoff. And then it kind of just felt like he got an answer to a relationship issue and he can now like move on and have closure almost. Yeah, again, I was just kind of underwhelmed by it. Like I thought I thought him and Booth were interesting to see that kind of play out, and the ending was kind of interesting, but I just felt so underwhelmed by it. I don't know if you guys felt that way or not, but it kind of left me going, I just spent the last 2 hours waiting for this payoff, and it just wasn't there for me.
I thought my problem with the ending was that we've sat through 2 hours of this movie, and at no point except for the very end does anyone mention that if you intentionally burn someone, that it's a more intense punishment than murdering someone. I'm like, I've had to listen to Hugh Jackman complain for the last hour and a half, and at no point do we drop this little nugget of knowledge. And you don't learn that until after he like burns the dude, and then he has to go through his whole coma thing. And that was, I don't know if that's a big enough problem for me to complain about, but I just like, that's so dumb. Like how come we're just throwing this information at me at the end here? You know?
Are you talking about the punishment for Hugh Jackman because
yes,
he burned the guy?
Yes, the punishment for Hugh Jackman.
Yeah. I mean, so they gave and I agree with you there. They gave the exposition about burning someone, like what it does to them and how bad it is. And they could have easily dropped a line that said, I mean, to the point that this is so torturous to a person that, it's more egregious in the eyes of the law than murder. So
yeah, you'd say that, or say like even accidentally, it comes with huge legal consequences or something.
And to me, Ian, to your point, like I think the ending went on too long. To me, the perfect ending for this movie was after Nick and Watt, when he goes and gets her and gives his confession. Like they have this emotional moment of he's like, you need to go find your daughter, and I've done what I want to do, and I'm happy with where I'm at, and I want to go basically into this coma thing. I would have been perfectly pleased with this movie ending as it drifted away and he's giving his confession to her so that they can pull it out of her as part of his trial. If as it fades to black and he's starting to tell her the whole story, if it would have just gone to black and ended there, and we have this assumption of he's going to go to jail or whatever it is that they do, and it was the after that part that I was like, it's too much, because I don't care that he's laying in that thing reliving the memories. No shit, he's going to do that. Like, he made his choice. If he gets to do that, he's going to do it. Or even worse, he doesn't get to do that, right? So, but I want to be able to make that decision. And so for me, I think that would have really closed the ending off. I feel like especially after everything that goes on with Nick and Booth and how exciting that was, and like visceral, like I said, the emotion was there. Like, yeah, fry this dude. And I was like, yeah, he fried his ass. And now he's stuck in this terrible burning memory.
Dude, that scene was intense. He's like,
Yeah.
May's wrong. I'm not going to kill you. I was like, oh, damn. We know what he's going to do. How'd you get those scars? I'm like, oh, Joker's here.
Yeah, and I loved that because of how intense it was and how much I would wanted him to do that to this guy for what happened to her. And the way that they brilliantly made me hate her and then turn around and go, oh, look, she redeemed herself in the most horrific way possible for her. And now Nick has to live with the consequences of those choices, right? So I love that he smoked this guy, but then let that ending linger. Let that emotion be how we end.
Because that was intense.
Yeah.
And that might help Ian with his, like, everything's leading up to this intense moment. And then we can end it somewhere around there. But you're right. They drag on the movie for another 15 minutes.
Yep. And the only thing that happens after that are things that I don't care about.
Yeah.
They stick him in this pod, and does somebody take care of him? Like, this pulled me out of the movie because I'm sitting there trying to figure out
me too. I'm like, medically speaking, how does this work?
Yeah. Because that bath or that water is like nasty bad in a day. Because what happens to your skin if you were spent all your time in water like that? Like,
does he have a catheter?
It brought up a lot of questions, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, and why his machine?
Yeah, put him in one of those pods that Watts was selling, right?
Why wouldn't they just burn it into him? Just burn the good memories and then stick them in a cell.
Or why? And here's my problem. You just convicted this guy, or you're going to at least convict this guy of something that you've claimed is worse than murder. Why do we let this man go into a prison of his greatest hits of memories, right? Like the best memories that he has.
Oh, that's what he says. Like the DA cut him a deal for
that's right.
For his help in that murder conspiracy case or whatever.
That's right. I remember that now.
Which I'm like, what a generous DA.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I suppose that he probably built up some currency from all the help that because it's obviously this wasn't the first time that he had done this help.
Right.
But yeah, dude, I'm with you. It went too far.
I would say I did like the hinting towards how ingrained this technology is in society, like in the legal system, that you can get a warrant to go 10 years back in someone's memory. And I'm like, that is pretty cool. But that also means there's laws around like privacy, right?
Yeah. One thing I really liked about this movie was it brought up those kind of questions that were interesting to think about. Because I was sitting there, talking to my mom about it. It was like, so does this go against the right to not self-incriminate? Like, how can you just be like, oh, let's pop in your mind and see if you did it or not? So that was interesting kind of line to follow that this movie brought up.
That's a really good point, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like, I don't know. It's sad because I feel like there's so many cool things about this movie, but the story itself, just because there was so much that needed to be set up, it suffered because of that.
Oh, I have one more question about the world building side of things. Yeah. Hugh Jackman, during his huge monologue in the beginning, explains that the barons picked up land for pennies on the dollar. I don't understand that. How did they do that?
I think they like flooded it, right? Like they made it. Didn't they make it non-livable in order to buy it up? And then it was like the only dry land. That was kind of the impression I was getting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it was like a combination of things. So as the war was going on and the flooding was happening, they obviously weren't going to war, the barons, so they were destroying land, like Ian was saying, and then people were desperate because they lost their homes, they lost their jobs, so they're all pretty much destitute, and so they would sell their land and what they had access to these barons for really cheap because desperation creates need, right? And so you'll sell pennies on the dollar. So that's how they really fucked these people over because they could. and they saw an opportunity, which we know happens all too often in the world. So
rich people, man,
I'm telling you. But it was yeah, and I think, oh man, it was just such a cool world to build on, right? And I think it was just a weird setup. You have this war-torn, flooding world because of environmental issues, these things that we'll have a chance of seeing in the future if we're not careful. And then all of a sudden there's this like detective mystery shoved into the middle of this really weird world that you took so much time to set up that I wanted to know more about it. And unfortunately, your mystery in the middle wasn't as interesting as the world that you built. So
yeah,
it was really distracting.
The Booth guy, I think everyone was like, maybe May wasn't who you thought she was. And at one time, Booth was like, she's a terrible person. And when you find out, you're going to be very sad. You're going to have the big sad. And I'm like, she wasn't a terrible person. She was a drug addict. I was like, really? That's the worst this post-apocalyptic world has to offer, is a drug addict who was dating a drug dealer? Come on.
Doesn't Booth say like the truth is gonna damn you? Like, he makes it sound so bad, and then you see what happened. You're like, I don't even get how this was that bad in Booth's eyes, let alone Hugh Jackman's.
Yeah, Booth is a murderer. He's a mafia hitman, essentially.
Yeah, crooked cop. And
May is a way better person than him.
No, I'm with you on that. I didn't even think about that. That's an extreme response. Like,
yeah, that's a very like damning review of someone who does drugs.
And then, I mean, really sacrifices herself to save a child. Like,
yeah,
after having helped kill her mom or his mom.
Is Booth's idea of like, oh, she was just conning you? But like, he had the memory of her confessing her love to Nick, to Hugh Jackman's character. So
yeah, it's a very interesting. And I get, the only thing I can think of is that it was because Booth knew that he set her up to go and get this guy and like make him fall in love. But the reason why you start a relationship is very rarely, if ever, the reason that it continues, right? And relationships change. Like, that's the other thing that I think people forget is like, and I think it's, to be honest, let me wax philosophical here for a minute. I think that's why we have so many divorces these days, is because people expect a relationship when it starts to stay that way forever.
Mm-hmm.
And it can't. It's impossible. Relationships adapt when people adapt, and people are constantly changing, whether you like it or not. And as you change, your relationship has to change. And the people within that relationship have to adapt with how those changes are happening. So to say that, I always get really frustrated when I watch a movie that has this basic relationship trope of a relationship starts, it's really good. Things change in the middle. It goes to shit because they don't adapt. And we just all look at that and go, oh, it's normal. Well, change your fucking normal then. You know what I mean? So I liked that for him, he was watching this going, oh, she did some shitty things. She had a problem. And the reason that the relationship started was really crappy. She tricked me. But at the end, we adapted and she adapted. In fact, you can tell that she drug on this mission of getting these memories to try to avoid having to do it all together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I did like some of the little writing things that they did for her, like implying destroy all the memories. Because if they're all destroyed, then she doesn't have to go through with the con, right? Or you don't love me. We've only known each other for a few months. Trying to like create some distance of when this hits the fan eventually. I don't want this to be as terrible as it's going to be. Right? So like little things like that, I really liked her delivery of it. I really liked that they thought about that and they showed like she was actively trying to protect Hugh Jackman's character, even though she was pressured into doing this.
Well, and the one flashback piece that the memory that they got really well in this movie was the one where she asks him to tell her a story and with a happy ending. And he says, there's no such thing as happy endings. There's only sad endings, especially when the story's happy. And she tells him, tell me the story that ends in a happy story, then stop it in the middle. Because she wants to know that she's asking him to confirm that this can end happily. And he's saying it won't, even though he has no idea why she wants this. And so we realize, I mean, right out the gate, they tell you this is not going to have a happy ending. And it's only thing that's happy is in the middle, these 3 months that they were together. And she was trying to move forward with it. He had no idea what was happening. So it was very that piece and the fact, but that's again, they call back on it, and that's technically how they end this movie. That was the other thing that you could have done I talked about cutting to black right as he's giving his confession. You could have faded from the confession to that memory, and then the completion of that memory where he talks about the Greek tragedy and then cuts it off about it having a happy ending, which it very much doesn't. And then just show him, or like, how cool would it have been at the end of he tells that story, it has a happy ending, they kiss, and then it shows this overhead shot of him in his little floating bubble thing, and it just fades away up into the sky away from it and then cuts to black. Like, that shit would have been cool as fuck. I think there were so many things they could have done to make this movie really, really better than it was. But it wasn't. The more I think about it, it's not a bad movie. It's just feels like a first-time really talented writer making a full movie and directing their first movie.
If we followed your plan of like cutting to black at that moment, we would miss the scene of him confronting the Baron's son.
Ooh, that's
which
fair.
Is one of my favorite lines of the movie, where the Baron's son puts the gun to his own head, and he's like, "You've never done your dirty work, and I doubt you have it in you to start now."
That's fair. Was that after the memory scene, or was that?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's because he goes and he does like all the confession stuff, right? And then
Yeah,
the
I thought
last
he like
scene is the memory bit.
Yeah, I thought he sealed all the things he would need to put this guy away, including that.
You're right.
Then
right.
goes to Tandy Newton or to Watts and says, "Here's my confession," knowing that they're going to pull all of that shit out of him anyway.
You're right. Yep.
Yeah.
Man, can you think
That
about
was a
how
great scene.
little they would need to like give people a wire? Like you could send undercover people in and get all the information.
Yeah.
Oh man, there's so many interesting ways this technology could have been used to create a story, and it's about somebody who had their significant other leave them and finding resolution. And I just feel like you could have done so much more. Anyways, I'll stop.
Dude,
I'm getting
this
into like rant mode.
technology is like the NSA's wet dream. So you can make a whole story about that.
Yeah.
It's true. The world and especially the technology is far more interesting.
Javier,
Yeah.
I did want to get, there was one scene that I watched where I was like, I want to hear Javier talk about this. And that's when Watts storms this like bar where St. Joe is. The guy gets shot, I'm guessing by a shotgun, and flies from the front of the door all the way like over a couple pool tables to the back wall. And then she comes around and it's like a couple 9mm or something.
Yeah. She clearly doesn't have a shotgun.
Yeah.
Right? I laughed at that part. He said I was watching it with my brother and my nephew, and he was just like, this movie, I was taking this movie seriously until this moment. Another part of that scene where Han Soto was dual wielding these like huge ass handguns, right? And at one point, I'm like, this dude would be shooting himself in the hand because he's like one fully extended, one like by his hand. I'm like, this dude is gonna shoot his hand off. Like, what?
There were so many issues with that whole scene in that place. Like the whole Hugh Jackman being underwater and like these fish kept coming up and like bumping him in the face, and he
just
did this
harassing
weird
him.
like look on his face, and I'm like, that's really distracting. And then you could see that they used the same shot like 3 times because he had the exact same face on like 3 times when he gets hit by a fish. I was like, well, that's lazy editing right there. But I did love this shot where she shoots the bullet through the tank and he has to like get wide-eyed as this bullet goes through the water up front. That part was funny, but the rest of that scene was really off-putting.
And his weapon of choice is definitely a syringe because he keeps like pocketing those left and right. And then the guy, would it kill you if you put a syringe through the guy's eye? Like I was thinking that would just be incredibly painful and maybe some like brain damage or something, but he offs that guy with the syringe to the eye.
Maybe he shoves it like really far, so it's not just the needle, it's like the whole syringe in there, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you can take a syringe to the eye because there's surgeries and procedures where they actually put a needle into your eye. But if you go far enough, your brain is right there. So,
I
mean, if you put it far enough in and you get like the actual casing of the syringe, I mean, I think it could kill you pretty quick. And he hits that needle at the end there pretty damn hard. Like,
puts his weight into it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that would be my only assumption is that he got in there and hit the brain. And if you do that, then you're not coming back from that very well.
I love how they spend all the time leading up to that scene talking about how, what's her name? Emily, his sidekick. His assistant is like this great shot, right? And then she gets in this firefight and she like can't hit shit.
Yeah.
like I think I'm supposed to assume it's because she's drunk, right, or something. But
yeah,
she is like missing left and right, hit a dude's leg. I'm like, dude, get your shit together, sharpshooter.
Well, I laughed because the pillars in that place didn't stand a chance. Like,
yeah.
They're like, because my thought was, it's like, oh, just because someone's standing behind there, we're just gonna shoot those. We're not gonna move around and try to get a better shot.
No,
we're just gonna shoot, and
it's only covering like half of them,
except for Watts because she can stand sideways, and then but I'm like, then you got to be able to see the other side of her. Anyway, that was a terrible scene. Like, terrible.
It was the most like action-packed scene, except for the hand-to-hand fight with Booth. But I was like, when they're fighting, right, in the water, and then he falls over and just gets his arm stuck in a piano. I was like, how does... And my nephew plays piano, right? So he's like worked on pianos. And I look at him and he's like, the space between piano strings are like this far apart. Like, I don't know how he got his arm stuck there.
Well, and even if he did, so I could see... Like, if he went in there far enough and it's decrepit enough, you could get him jammed because they're tight too. So you could get him to close on your arm, but those strings would shred your arm. Like when he pulls that out like that, it pulls his arm out like that, and there's nothing wrong.
His arm's good.
Yeah, no, those strings would shred your arm coming out if you did get them stuck. Because he's not wrong. Like there's very little gap between strings. You could break a couple strings and get your arm stuck in there, but oh my God, the damage it would do. But the problem with that is that piece of a scene that you're talking about, when he gets his arm stuck, led to one hell of a beautiful visual. Like the cinematography in this movie is outstanding.
That was cool.
When the bottom of that stage or that ceiling falls out and you fall into like that opera house and they're falling with the piano and the two of them are like sinking there. That was such a beautiful shot. And so it was really interesting how poor some of the movie was, but the visuals of it were like, it was really stunning to watch them walking through the water down in downtown Miami or boating through down. Like, that was really cool. And I love like the dark and the light. And it was very interesting to me that all of the very positive scenes and memories and this may go to, I wish they'd explain this. They don't go out during the day, but Rebecca Ferguson's character may like to go out at dusk because the city hadn't woken up yet, she said, and she's out on that bed on the ceiling, on the roof or whatever. But like all of the good memories between the two of them, except the couple where they were having sex and so they were in a bed at night. But most of them, like when they're talking, happened in the light, right? So that I wonder if that is a perception thing for the memory as opposed to everything happening in the dark in this world now because of global warming or whatever it is. So I did like the cinematography, the visuals in this movie are outstanding.
Yeah, that was a cool scene to look at. I had a problem with that, just the swimming in the ocean thing, right? Yeah. You're like diving down into this opera house. I'm like, if anyone has ever gone swimming in the ocean, you know that just opening your eyes in the water is like a no-go. You don't do that. So I'm like,
you don't just get used to that shit.
Yeah. I'm like, this ocean is very clean considering it has flooded a city. You would think there'd be a bunch of debris, but there's not. And we're just, holding our breath, diving, 200 feet in one breath. Like all those little things. I was like, this looks amazing, but both of these dudes are dead.
Oh, yeah. Well, and then that is one silent motherfucker that's been holding his breath for a long time.
Oh, yes.
And he comes out of that hole in the floor, and I'm like, dude, you would be gasping for air. Like, when he comes out, and it was a cool visual again, right? So the guy's sitting there, and you see his face pop up out of the water. Then he sneaks up on this guy. But there's two problems. Again, you'd be gasping for breath. There's no way they're that silent. And two, that wood's already so rotted and weak. Once you got out of that hole, there's no way that the strength of that roof or that ceiling stays intact.
No.
With you walking on it at that point. So
if I'm Booth, I'm standing up top with a board or something to take this guy out as soon as he pops his head up.
Yeah, did he just assume he was dead?
Yeah,
He was just like, one good kick to the chest. That's all it takes to kill this guy.
I mean, technically, like you said, they were like 200 or 300 feet in the water. He should have been dead because they've been in the water for a very long time.
Yeah, but so the dude was in the water longer than Hugh Jackman was.
True.
So like he just assumed that he kicked off of him and swam to the surface, and Hugh Jackman just died from that.
I guess. I mean, nobody said Booth was smart, but yeah, there's a lot of
Clearly.
things that you have to like really suspend. The suspension of disbelief needed in this movie in a lot of places is very high.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that was definitely one of them. It was a very cool scene, but it's very unrealistic in a lot of ways.
And then Booth was also simping over May, where he's
Everybody was simping over May, dude. Like,
what's so annoying
Yeah.
about Booth though is he's like caressing this earring like he's Smeagol, right?
Yeah.
And he's quoting her speech to Nick, and he knows this at this point. He's just being a little weirdo.
Did Booth burn that memory in? Because there's like 2 times where, like, when Nick finally finds him, he thinks it's May, and this girl is caressing his face, saying the same line from that memory that Nick sees Booth kill May.
I don't think he he might have it burned, but it obviously isn't burned to the extent that like the mom is, that guy's mom is, because that guy's mom, that was crazy shit.
Yeah, that was
like the whole fucking house is
but
dressed
she was
up
also
like her dad.
Yeah, she was also just living in that memory. There was no because once he pulls her out of it and gets her in front of a mirror, she kind of like comes to for a while, right?
Yeah, that's all it took. Was just slapping her in front of a mirror.
There's a lot of weird shit there. That I wanted some explanation there, but I did find Booth's obsession with May odd. Though, I mean, I suppose technically they were to a certain degree spending a lot of time together in those 3 months, and so for him, I mean, it's not unrealistic for him to like fall in love with her and get obsessed with her, but it was just the payoff wasn't there. Like the buildup wasn't there for the payoff to be good enough, right? And so I just think you could have left the whole him and May thing out.
The impression that I got was that he went and he rewatched that memory so many times trying to figure out where Freddie was because she was telling him without telling him. And that's kind of where the obsession with May came from, is he's now also forced to relive this intimate memory. Don't know if that's right, but that's what the impression that I got.
Makes a lot of sense.
That does make a lot of sense.
Well, and you can tell that he was affected in the moment when she was talking to Nick through him. Like he was obviously affected in that moment. So there had been like some emotional attachment that he had gained enough that he was giving into what he thought was her, giving him what he wanted in that emotional sense. So it was a really awkward scene because he like loses his shit after when he realizes who she's talking to. So how would that mentally affect you? You have to live with the fact that if this dude ever catches you, you know that she set him up to give you to give him a message through. Oh, that's fucked up.
Yeah.
So during that speech, she kisses Booth, right? Because she's kissing Nick. I'm like, if I'm Nick and I'm going through this, I'm like, you kiss this orc looking motherfucker? Are you for real right now?
But that is a moment where Hugh Jackman's ability to play emotion, Jesus, that man can really play. Like his acting is outstanding, especially when it comes to like raw emotion. Like his anger, his like heartbreak, like that when he calls tears, like that shit's real. And then like his visceral anger when he's sitting there and just going at Booth, like fuck, like the growl and the just anger in his voice, man, I love it. Hugh Jackman is outstanding.
Yeah, he did a good job in this movie. In fact, if it was anyone of less of an actor than Hugh Jackman, I'm not saying anyone other than Hugh Jackman, but like the quality of acting, if that was dropped down even just a notch, I probably would say this movie's not worth watching.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the two mains, right? So I think Hugh Jackman and Rebecca Ferguson, because she did a great job of endearing you to her, even though you knew there was some shit that was off. And even when they were playing her as the villain that they wanted you to think she was for most of the movie, like you still had this like attachment to her. And again, I'm with you. I think anyone of a lesser value of actor than Rebecca Ferguson, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
at all. So, all right, should we rate this thing?
Yes. Yeah.
I'll go first. Look, this movie has a lot of flaws, and it you can tell that it's a first-time director, and it's a very talented writer. Lisa Joy is extremely talented writer. She's written some very, very good stuff and very smart things. I don't know if you guys ever, back in the day, it was a TV show that lasted for like 2 seasons called Pushing Daisies.
I never saw that. I have heard of that though.
Anyway, very interesting TV show. It was very underrated, but she writes very well. She produced and wrote on Burn Notice, which is also a very good show.
I love Burn Notice.
Dude, I know, right?
What a great show.
She writes on Westworld, which I know you guys didn't love it, but I love Westworld and some very good writing in that as well. And she wrote this, and it's a very interesting world. But you can tell it's a first-time director because there's a lot of flaws in the continuity. There's a lot of flaws in how it plays out visually and things like that. So I'm excited to see more from Lisa Joy as she continues to hone her craft in directing and things like that. But I love the world that we're in. I want to know more about it. I love the acting. I love parts of the story, and I love the intense parts of this movie. The emotion and the intensity was there, and it really it pulled me in. And visually, the movie was stunning. And then we need to talk about. So there's the composer for this movie. The music in this was again outstanding. That fight scene between Booth and Nick, the music, this haunting music that's in the background, because it's not like this action music. It's just this haunting, quiet, very beautiful music, but it was very interesting, the music. And the composer's a guy named Ramin Djawadi, and he composes for Game of Thrones. He composed for Westworld. He does a lot of really cool things with music. So I enjoyed that. There are a lot of things to enjoy about this movie, but there are a lot of things that really aren't good about this movie as well. I think it was better than a lot of the things we've watched, but not as good as some of the things we've watched recently. So I'm going to just give this an average movie and call it a 2.5 and be done with it. And I don't know that I would actively seek this movie out, but I think there's parts that I wouldn't mind watching again, especially between Hugh Jackman and Rebecca Ferguson and then Hugh Jackman and Booth. I think some of those scenes I would be okay watching again, but I don't know that I would ever sit down and fully watch this movie again. Javier, what about you?
Yeah, I think I agree with all the good points that you brought up, like the acting, the visuals, like all of that's really good. I just think there's a lot lacking in the connection between the potential of this cool world and the story. It's just not there. Like that connection, it just seems it almost seems like like JJ, you said, it's just like different movies that they just sort of mashed together. So I didn't love that. And I agree with Ian that it's not a good enough ending for the amount of just torturous buildup that we had to sit through. Like it was just long and convoluted, and yeah, there's just it's not a good enough buildup for the payoff that you get at the end. But with that said, there are some cool scenes that I think were really awesome. I'm going to give this a little bit less than an average movie. I'm going to give this a 2 because I like we talked about, there's some like really redeeming parts of this, but I just don't think it makes up for the rest of like the things that they missed. So I'm going to give this 2. I'm not going to actively watch this again. In fact, I probably won't sit down and just wholeheartedly pay attention to this movie again. But if someone wants to watch it with me, like if I know Nicole is a Hugh Jackman fan, so she might want to watch this. So if she wants to watch it, then I'll play on my phone while we watch this movie.
Get some RuneScape in.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Ian, bring us home.
I'm with you guys too. I think we're all kind of in the same boat on this one. I felt while there was some cool visuals, I often felt like the story was sacrificed to get those visuals, and they didn't necessarily mesh well with like how things would happen or should happen. Even the 3D versus the 2D and the dreams, like by the ending you see May and Nick kind of almost in this interactive dream or memory visualization device, and it felt like the only reason that was 3D was so that moment could happen and kind of give you the payoff of finding out that, you know, May and Nick did in fact love each other. But yeah, for me, it comes back to, like Javier said, so much buildup and not the payoff that I was looking for. I'm going to go with a 2.5, and I'm going to stick at that just because how interesting the world was for me. It left me wanting more. And like you guys said, acting was amazing, but 2.5, and I have no plans to watch this again. I think this is a one and done. You know the story. You're not going to get more out of it by going back and watching it again,
Yeah.
like you would, maybe like an Inception or something, which is kind of what I thought this movie was going to be, is something more along those lines. But 2.5, that's where I stand.
A couple of 2.5s and a 2. Pretty average movie, right down the middle. Worth watching if you need something to watch, but don't stress about not seeing it if you haven't. And if you like Hugh Jackman and Rebecca Ferguson, it's probably worth a watch because those two really do stand out in this movie for sure. Next week, Cop Shop. Excited for this shit show of a crazy ass movie.
Wait, what is it?
Cop Shop.
Who's that?
It's the one with
Gerard Butler and what's his name?
Yeah,
Frank
Grillo.
from Warrior.
Yeah, Frank Grillo.
Ooh.
And it's the one where they're trying to kill the guy, Frank Grillo's character. And then the assassin like licks the window. They've got him in jail.
Oh yeah, I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's like that's psychotic.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I love
Cop
Gerard
Shop.
Butler. I liked him even in the movies that people don't like him in. So
I don't think I've ever not liked him in a movie, but there's some movies he's in that I just did not like the movie.
that's fair.
But I love Gerard Butler. Yeah, so Cop Shop, that'll be next week. Tune in for that one. We're excited for that one. It's either going to be amazing or a real shit show. So
I think it's going to be a very White House Down type of movie.
that's what I'm afraid of. That's what I'm afraid of. But as long as Gerard Butler's good, I can't wait. And then it just looks like it could be entertaining.
Well, I'm thinking White House Down meets Law Abiding Citizen. That's what I'm thinking is going to be like the little combo.
Could be. A little too much comedy thrown into a very dark movie.
Oh, he's in Phantom of the Opera?
Oh, yeah. That was
Is he the Phantom?
That was his big American breakout, was that one. That's where he went from doing Scottish roles to being big in American movies.
Shut up. Really?
Wow.
I'm pretty sure it was Reign of Fire.
Dude, Reign of Fire's dope.
I love that movie. Everyone hates that movie.
That is a guilty pleasure of mine.
Dude,
Reign
bald
of
head
Fire.
Matthew McConaughey really does it for me.
I want to see that in more movies.
Yeah. And dragons, just like, and gritty, dark versions of dragons. And I fucking love it. No, I liked Reign of Fire. Yeah, he was in that, but that movie didn't do well enough for it to be his breakout movie.
It did not do well.
If you want, in my opinion, one of the best movies Gerard Butler's ever been in is a Scottish movie. It's called Dear Frankie. Casey introduced me to it. It's not this is not a happy-go-lucky movie. It's a heavy movie, but it's got some really great emotional parts, and he's a heavy part of this movie. I highly recommend, if you guys want to go watch an interesting movie, see if you can find Dear Frankie. Watch it when you're feeling good about life. Don't watch it if you're sad, because it's not got a lot of like it ends very well, but it's pretty heavy throughout the movie. So very good movie though.
I am shocked that I can be a fan of an actor who's in a movie called Machine Gun Preacher.
Yeah, I don't think
I
I ever
haven't
saw
seen that one.
I haven't seen it either, but it's on his little list. Anyway, sorry.
No, it's okay. We can talk about Gerard Butler. So that'll be coming out on the 20th of September. Cop Shop, that episode. So tune in for that one with us. We'll obviously do a spoiler free before that, but there is our review and our verdict on Reminiscence. Check us out on our website, whatsourverdict.com. Leave us a message. Send us an email at host@whatsourverdict.com. We would love to hear from you. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. We'd love those reviews. We love hearing your feedback. Check us out on the socials. Come reach out to us at What's Our Verdict at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can find us there. Leaving posts about our new episodes. We leave a nice review of our movies. Yeah, it's a fun episode. We appreciate you tuning in. We'll catch you on the next one.
Bye-bye now.
Cinemagic out.